Hello everyone, as always, I'm Vlad Sparastoria and I know what I have to shoot.
And this is a gun that so many of you have asked me about, and maybe it was finally time for me to show it to you. Obviously, we're talking about the Beretta APX. Of course, in Italy, it can be considered the queen of pistols. It's obviously a historic company that has produced weapons for many years, widely used by the police and the military. And many people, whether for personal defense or for sport, have had to use a pistol.
The Beretta APX, however, deviates quite heavily from what was the traditional line of Beretta pistol designs.
And that's because Beretta had to adapt a bit to the times. And the Beretta APX is their answer to these times.
What am I talking about?
As you surely know, the Beretta 90 series, known abroad mainly as the 92 pistol and in Italy as the 98.
Because the 9X21 has been one of the most popular semi-automatic pistols since the 1970s.
Being part of what are called the Wonder Nines, the Miraculous Nines, a series of extremely popular designs in the 70s and 80s, even into the 90s, which saw major companies competing with each other.
The queen of these competitions was. We've already talked about it extensively in previous episodes.
The American adoption of a new pistol, the M9.
The American adoption was very famously won by Beretta with its Beretta 92.
And this saw these Wonder Nines, these fantastic nines, put in competition with each other.
Beretta, with its M9 in the 1980s, became the undisputed queen, in a certain sense, of semi-automatic pistols.
However, from that moment on, many could say that Beretta rested on its laurels a bit.
Nori, now without criticizing Beretta's management, I mean Beretta is doing just fine as a company.
Their revenue is excellent.
As far as research and development is concerned, they were caught a bit off guard by many other companies.
And let this be very clear. This is something relatively normal. When you have a good design that you keep producing, sometimes you get stuck on that design. By the way, it's exactly the same thing I told you about. It happened at FN.
When they had the FN in the Browning High Power, while other companies were making more modern pistols, FN kept producing the high power. So they were caught off guard. In a way, the same thing happened to Beretta.
Because while they kept producing this Wonder 9, this pistol that technologically speaking was from the 70s, yes, making various improvements,
Other companies were working hard, especially Glock, which we remember as being very important in history of firearms, because
It wasn't the first to introduce it, but it definitely made the concept of the polymer pistol very popular all over the world.
Striker fired. Glock was by no means the first or the most innovative to do this, but they had the ability to set a new standard in the market.
If the pistols of the 70s, 80s, and 90s were completely made of metal, usually double action, like almost all the Wonder Nines, the pistol of the new millennium had to be striker fired and have a polymer frame. Beretta already had a polymer pistol in development, however, it still wasn't a striker fired pistol. I'm obviously talking about the PX4, which was derived from another design.
They nearly forgot the Beretta 9000 Beretta's first polymer pistol, which was a real failure.
Maybe, if we get the chance, one day we'll be able to bring it to the channel, the PX4.
However, apart from the fact that it was a gun with a hammer, still with a firing pin, so with a trigger system. For many, it's perceived as something from the last millennium. For many, it's not a satisfying weapon. It's a weapon in which we've talked about the channel.
There are those who use it for work. For example, I know a lot of security guards, or simply by working with various local police forces.
Here around Legnano, many people carry the PX4 as a service weapon.
I still have yet to meet someone who truly appreciates it. The opinions aren't very positive, and actually, knowing this weapon, I can understand why.
However, just like the competition for the M9 in the 1980s set a standard in the market.
That's how it would have been. With the new competition announced by the American Army for the Modular Handgun system. A new pistol, actually two new pistols, that were supposed to replace all the old Beretta M9AS, but also other weapons used by other armed branches of the American forces. The Marines and Air Force each had their own programs.
In short, all these things are quite scattered among the various branches.
They wanted to have a weapon and for this weapon, there would be a competition. So, various companies had to present a new weapon that met these requirements.
Beretta, we already discussed this in a dedicated video.
He tried to convince the Americans to buy an updated version of the Beretta M9, the M9A3. However, the Americans very openly said, no, we don't want an updated version of the M9, we want something new. Now, whether there is merit in this statement or not, I'll leave it up to you in the comments.
We'll probably leave this matter to firearms historians to discuss in a few centuries.
However, the Beretta M9A3 was excluded, and Beretta actually found itself having to develop a new weapon that met these requirements almost in record time. Thus, the Beretta APX was born, which corresponds to what, at least according to the American Army, should be the weapon of the future, the APX.
It was not selected.
Only the Schweizerische Industriegesellschaft 320 and the Glock will make it to the final stage of the selection.
Which of course then lost the competition.
As we well know, the story of this competition and how transparent it was is a whole different story.
Also because, as you may well know, Schweizerische Industriegesellschaft is having a lot of problems.
Anyway, many famous pistols that are very successful on the market today were also excluded from that competition.
The Smith & Wesson MP2, the FN509 that we recently saw on the channel.
And obviously,
The one we have today.
the Beretta APX. So let's do this. Let's take a closer look at exactly what Beretta did for this program, and then obviously we'll test it live. So, let's take a closer look at the Beretta APX. First of all, how do we know it's a Beretta and how do we know it's an APX? Obviously, from the Beretta logo.
Gardone Valtrompia made in Italy.
Here on the plastic frame, we have the APX marking on the right side. There's the Beretta logo.
On the grip again, there's the indication that it's the APX model and two important safety warnings.
This is a very American thing, if I may say so, having to write these safety warnings on the gun.
The first warning tells us to read the manual before use, which I also strongly recommend for any firearm. And the second warning is that it fires without the magazine.
Maybe to educate people who are used to firearms with a magazine safety.
Let's leave it. It's a very old story, from an old American lawsuit. Anyway, what are the controls of the weapon?
We quite obviously have our trigger with its safety, the standard trigger safety. All over the industry we have this lever that we use for disassembly, and here we have the hold open control.
With the empty magazine, the slide stays open and the magazine release is clear. As you can see, the Beretta PX fits perfectly within the standards. And this is a very interesting thing that I want to highlight for a moment. It's interesting to notice how much the designs tend to converge.
This is true, not only for pistols, but for almost all pieces of technology.
And for that matter, also for biology. Just think about how maybe 10, 15 years ago, there were tons of smartphones or different types of phones, while today all smartphones from a distance are basically the same.
These things happen all the time in technology.
Consider modern TVs. Most are basically the same.
Honestly, this often happens with weapons too, when certain design features become popular, become mainstream, and various government agencies want to highlight them and are willing to pay for them.
Well, I often say that striker-fired polymer pistols are, in a way, almost all the same. It's not a coincidence, it's actually a classic case in the history of design convergence.
So actually, these controls we've seen are the same controls you'll find on practically every striker-fired semi-automatic pistol.
Polymer is not a coincidence at all. It's a very deliberate choice. What obviously makes the difference are the details. The sights are tall. They're this front sight and rear sight mounted on a dovetail.
With these visible dots, let's test it live. I really like this type of sight. A very interesting thing that starts to reveal one of the first features
of the Beretta, or rather the Beretta PX made for the Modular handgun system.
For this American requirement, the serial number of the weapon is hidden in this little window. Why do this? What's the reason?
The reason becomes a bit clearer if we disassemble the weapon to understand how it works. Disassembling the Beretta PX is actually quite simple.
We need to push out this latch by pressing here. Push it all the way out. it has quite a bit of resistance, and then we can rotate it. Like this. We can simply pull it out. The weapon's action from its flow clearly by separating them. The recoil spring. The weapon's barrel from the slide.
Now the 4 parts into which this weapon is disassembled are probably the same 4 parts that we find in every single polymer pistol.
From the Glock of the 80s to today, again, the convergence of design.
Here we see a dual recoil spring with its guide rod and notably, something rarely used by Beretta, which the company has always valued.
In its tilting block system, a Browning system, more technically speaking, it's a Schweizerische Industrie Gesellschaft system because the locking happens in the ejection port, controlled by this ram. The tilting of the barrel. Actually, Beretta didn't have much experience with tilting barrels. In fact, they experimented with it on the Beretta 51. Just think about that. When we had to make the Beretta 51,
One of the first prototypes explored the possibility of making a Browning system, a unique and fascinating prototype I'd love to get my hands on. But they had also made a tilting barrel for the subcompact version of the PX4 APX4 that, as you know, uses a rotating barrel except for the subcompact version. Next is the slide, clearly milled from solid.
here obviously there's the firing pin, and we can also quite clearly see the firing pin safety, that, as you can see, comes out on the other side with this little pin.
It's something that can also be found in
The Beretta 90 series.
I don't know how useful it is, but at least it lets the shooter know that
there's pressure on the trigger and that the system is working. Okay, honestly I don't see much use for this thing, but they put it in maybe, perhaps to
Those who were used to it from other Beretta pistols. For the rest, actually the slide
doesn't hide any kind of surprise. Actually, for these dimensions, it seems pretty big to me, but this slide is surprisingly thin and light.
The part that really interests us, maybe.
What I mentioned to you earlier is the frame of the weapon. As you can see, the frame of the weapon is this plastic part, but it has an insert, which you can clearly see from the slide rails.
It has an insert that contains the firing mechanism, and this insert is legally considered the weapon.
This is done specifically to make the weapon modular, meaning I can take a frame that is no longer legally considered the weapon and swap it with another frame with different features, maybe a smaller, more compact one. The idea behind the modular handgun system was to have two weapons, a full size and a compact one, but with the same identical trigger mechanism, a trigger mechanism that is swappable, interchangeable, and potentially usable in frames of different sizes. That's why the serial number of the weapon, which has to be placed on the frame, well, it's on the frame, because the plastic part, legally speaking, is not the frame. Precisely because of the presence of this insert,
which we also find, for example, in the Schweizerische Industrie Gesellschaft 320, and it was one of the fundamental requirements of the modular handgun system program.
Apart from this, there are no surprises regarding the operation of the weapon. I repeat, yet another case of design convergence. I don't know how many times I've said that word today. So, let's reassemble the weapon. We can put it here on its sliding rails. Here it is, ready. Let's go. Let's try it. And here we are, finally on the shooting range at the Legnano Shooting Club. What are we going to try? This Beretta APX. It's insanely hot. My glasses are fogging up, but still with great joy, let's try it as always. The firearms, we have our magazines. We can insert them into the gun, rack the slide. The gun is obviously ready to fire. Let's see. And obviously, once the rounds are finished, the gun stays open. So, I'll tell you my first impressions. As for the trigger and the sights, they are very positive. The trigger for a striker-fired pistol is very, very good. Since it doesn't recock the striker, Unlike, for example, the leg lock, it makes the trigger quite crisp. The sights are excellent. I really like this type of tall, squared off sights. Well, you've probably already figured out that these are my favorites from this point of view, especially those dots that help a bit with aiming.
If I have to make a criticism regarding the trigger, by the way, it's something they're going to change because many people have criticized it, and it will be changed in the APX A1.
And this this safety on the trigger, which is a bit annoying, it sticks out quite a lot, it's pretty sharp and ends up giving, I don't know how to explain it to you, a bit of a problem. A misleading trigger sensation. It's a strange thing. I'm not surprised that they later changed it. The shots anyway are
Straight, maybe a little low, with the classic sights in combat, where you need to cover the target a bit better.
We're definitely not doing slow, aimed shooting.
And right now, I'm curious to try the APX A1, because I know that with the APX A1, I haven't really changed the shape of this one.
Safety on the trigger, because it's annoying.
Apart from that, the trigger pull is very good, the reset is also very crisp, and those of you who have been following me for a long time know how much I love that.
A good reset on the pistol. Let's reload and try again. The recoil feels like any other pistol. In 9, weapon handling technique is most important here above all else.
Is there anything to say about the grip, about handling? I'm not crazy about the grip, honestly.
You know how much I love a good grip? And for me, the ergonomics of how you hold it are extremely important. Whereas with the recent
Review of the FN509, you saw love at first sight. This is not love at first sight.
here, for me, maybe it's just me, but personally, I like the grips.
Straight and with a somewhat aggressive texture. Right now it's 32 degrees.
I'm sweating like a beast. My hands are sweaty right now.
And
on many smooth surfaces like this one. I'm not getting a lot of grip. My fingers slip a little bit. Again, this isn't really a flaw. It's just a very personal thing. Very personal to me. But I feel like my hand slips a little bit.
Slips, while with other weapons it doesn't slip as much. Besides the fact that I would like more padding here, in this space.
It definitely feels precise where it aims. Undoubtedly, it works great.
The Beretta APX is an interesting weapon, though.
Two thoughts, or really the same thought, in two parts about it. I wouldn't want my reasoning to be hindsight reasoning, because with hindsight, with other information available.
They're all very intelligent, but it's as if I have this feeling.
It's a feeling, I repeat, influenced by hindsight, but I have the feeling that this weapon was developed in record time.
Also because shortly after, with hindsight, they introduced the APX A1, which corrects it. Many small things, I wouldn't even call them flaws. Many of the little imperfections that maybe here
The shape of the safety on the trigger in terms of the gun's functionality is kind of bullshit, but it's something that could be done better.
And there are a lot of these little details. I haven't told you, but
Here are the grips of the weapon. The surfaces where you rack it also change.
And even right now, they're pretty good. I get the impression it's a developed weapon.
quickly and overlooks a lot of small details. Putting that aside, though, I don't understand why there's no more love.
because it's a great weapon. It's a good polymer gun. It's an ergonomic polymer gun. It has good sights. It's very accurate. It has a good trigger. And yet,
it has almost no success at all in the world of polymer guns.
It's a little forgotten, both in Italy and in the rest of the world.
Could it be that it arrived very late?
At the party, we said.
Beretta was actually one of the very last companies in the world to introduce a striker-fired polymer pistol.
So when this gun arrives, the market has been saturated for decades with these pistols, which is a shame.
Because if they had gotten there earlier, if they had made an example like this sooner, they would definitely have a much bigger share of the market.
Because the gun is definitely very good.
Thank you all for watching this video. As always, remember that you are the ones who make these videos. You, like the person who brought me to the Legnano shooting range today to try this amazing gun. Without the contribution of kind people like you who write to me and offer to do this, making my reviews would be impossible, especially since I do 2 or 3 a week. And good luck finding all these guns because you don't make money with YouTube. On that note, if you want to support the channel, simply to buy ammunition. Consider subscribing and becoming a member for exclusive content and to support the channel.
Subscribing, on the other hand, is free, just like leaving a like, and a comment is free.
For me, as a content creator, it helps a lot and gives a strong signal to the YouTube algorithm that people like this content and it should be promoted. It's free for you, but it's very important to me. That's all from me for the day. As always, I'll see you next time.